I just sent the comment.
Yeah.
Oh, it's live.
It's live. We're
Oh
live.
my gosh. This is very cool. I love this.
I'm just going to make believe that no one's watching but us.
Yeah.
I think that's a good idea. That seems really, we'll just talk to each other like we're all in a room together.
Okay, so hello everyone. It's really lovely to see you. We're going to talk about discouragement because it's a favorite topic of mine right now. I happen to be Christina Chiu, and I'm the author of Beauty, which is coming out May 1st. And this is why I thought this would be a great time to talk about discouragement, because all my events were canceled. Yay! So about a year ago, I had this panel at a conference called AWP called Discouragement and How to Use It as a Motivating Tool. And it turned out that these particular people speaking were so incredible that when everything fell apart, I immediately thought of them. And I thought it would be helpful, not just for me, but for everyone who is dealing with all kinds of discouragement at this point, not just literary-wise or whatever, but just dealing with COVID-19. So I was hoping that Marie would start, Marie Lee, but she is not here at the moment. So we will start with Charles. Charles Salzberg has published more than 24 nonfiction books, has been nominated twice for the Seamus Award. His novel Devil in the Hole was named one of the best crime novels of 2013 by Suspense magazine. He's a founding member of New York Writers Workshop and is also on the board of Prison Rights and Mystery Writers of America, New York. Everyone, this is Charles Salzberg.
Hi. First of all, Christina, it's good to know that when things fall apart, you think of me. I don't know whether that's a compliment or not, but thank you. And Christina, here's a little tip. Hold up your book every once in a while. The one that you're not, that all your things were canceled. Good. Okay. You know, the timing of this couldn't get be any better, because this morning I got a rejection letter for a novel that I've been sending around. And it was the nicest rejection letter. It was all about how great a writer I am and how good I was, and
I love it.
Send me the next thing. But you know, this doesn't quite fit for what we're looking for. And so it led me, you know, we talk about discouragement. The best comment I ever got from anyone about discouragement was from an editor friend of mine who said, there are 1,000 ways to say no and only one way to say yes. And this morning I got one of those 1,000 ways of saying no, and it doesn't make you feel any better. It really doesn't. It's still a no. So, you know, every writer that I know, probably every artist, has gotten rejected an awful lot. And I was thinking about the topic because I knew I was doing this today. And I thought I used to, when I first started as a magazine journalist and writing novels, I used to save all my rejection letters. All of them. I had a whole drawer full of them. And the reason I did, and I think it's what kept me going, because this is what kind of, one of the things that keeps me going, is that I was waiting for that first acceptance so I could look back through all the rejections and say what fools they were, because here someone else had accepted me. And after a while, I realized I didn't have to keep those rejections anymore. First of all, they're in your head. I'll never forget the one that had a little smiley face on it. It was a rejection with a smiley face, which does you no good. It was by a pretty famous editor by the name of Gordon Lish, and he was at the New Yorker at the time. So, it's just something. What I used to do is everyone gets depressed after they get a rejection, and I found the best thing to do was send it out to 2 other places. Every time you get a rejection, send it out. Always have it out someplace, because if you don't, then you just sit in that rejecting mood. Whereas if you send it right out to other places, that hope springs eternal again. You know that someone's going to take it. So that's my big suggestion, is to always have things out there rotating. And the other thing is that, and it's hard friend of mine had a very famous psychiatrist as a father, and my friend Charlie is a writer. He was a playwright, and his father once said to him after he got a rejection, he said, "Charlie, it's not personal. It's not personal." And he said, "You know something, Dad? It is personal, because even though it's not personal, because they were rejecting your work, not you supposedly, your work is part of you, and it is personal. You can't help but take it personally." And so both of them were right.
Hey, is this on?
Yes, it is.
I can't hear you.
Anyway, so it's something we all have to deal with, and we're all going to find different ways of dealing with it. But I've always felt that if you're going to let it stop you from writing, then you're really not meant to be a writer. Go ahead, Christina. Do you want to introduce?
I'm just trying to figure out what is going on with Marie. Hold on.
I can see her. Is it?
Yeah, so can I.
Yeah, we can all see her and hear her. In fact, Marie, we can hear
Marie,
you.
we can hear you, but I don't see why we can't. And I can't see the bottom of the box because
Could she have muted herself?
I am. I'm going to change the mic.
I can hear her.
I can
We
hear you.
can hear you, Marie.
Yeah, but she can't hear us to tell her that. It feels like every single meeting that I do, every single Zoom call, they all start with everybody deciding who can hear whom and how much volume. It's kind of nuts.
Sorry, Charles. Okay, why don't you finish?
Keep going, Charles.
Well, I think that's all I'll say now when we get to the discussion part. But I just want to let everyone know that I don't
think so.
Right,
Does mic work? Does
Yes, it
does
works.
work?
Yes,
It works
perfectly.
perfectly.
It works.
I can't hear you.
Marie, check the little thing at the bottom where it says mute. Make sure there's not a line through mute.
This one works. Okay.
We'll do puppet shows. Wait, I'm going to do.
Somebody say something.
Yes,
You can-
Charles is
Yeah,
speaking.
I don't. Hang on. Okay, I'm going to try a different mic.
I don't think it's a mic. I think she needs to unmute herself somehow.
Yes.
I'm writing her a note now. I just wrote her a note.
Oh, did she go in?
She's back
I'm
now.
So, Marie, we're going to have Charles speak, and let's figure this out while.
No, it's
they're
not
speaking.
muted. No, because I checked all the stuff before I logged in. The mute's not on.
Volume up on your computer, hopefully.
Okay, so now I just have the computer on, and I still don't hear anything.
Well, nobody's talking while waiting for you. So you don't hear yourself talk?
Okay.
Nothing?
Yeah.
Nothing.
I can't even tell her to look at the note on the right-hand side.
Yeah. This is very funny.
Okay, so
Is this
you know
work?
what, Marie?
Is this work?
We can hear you. So this is what we're going to do.
Oh, I can hear you now. For some reason, yeah, this is working.
Okay. All right, great. So
Okay.
Charles is speaking, and you'll speak after he does. Okay.
Okay.
Great. Thanks, Charles.
Okay, just to finish up,
Sorry.
I don't care who you are. Guaranteed, every writer I know has a manuscript or more than one manuscript in their drawer that's been rejected, that they've had to put aside. And I have a friend, Jenny Milchman, who wrote 8 novels, and every single one of them was rejected numerous times. And on her 9th, she finally got it published and won an award for it. So what I tell people about discouragement is, have your moment of feeling sorry for yourself, and then just move on. And for me, the motivating factor was always sort of revenge or proving other people wrong. And a friend of mine had this great method is when she would get a rejection, she had a file, and she would put the name of the file was idiot file. And when she got an acceptance, she put it in the genius file. And that's kind of what you have to do. And as I said, Charlie's father was really right. If you take it personally, it's going to really hurt a lot more than realizing that it may not have anything to do with the quality of your writing. It may have to do with so many things that you don't understand that's going on. Anyway, so when we get to questions, we'll get back to me.
Wonderful. Okay, so our next reader is Marie Lee. I know Marie from the Asian American Writers Workshop. That was like 20 years ago when the workshop first started. So I've known Marie for a while. Marie Myung-Ok Lee is the author of Somebody's Daughter and Finding My Voice, which is coming out soon, right, Marie?
With the virus, not sure. I think I'll talk about a little bit about that right now.
Okay. All right. So her next novel, The Evening Hero, is forthcoming from Simon & Schuster. She's a staff writer at The Millions and has written about a range of health topics, including advocacy for her son and other children with autism. Her stories and essays have been published in The Atlantic, The New York Times, Slate, Salon, Guernica, and The Guardian. Marie, you're up.
Hi, great. Thanks for inviting me, and sorry for the technical issues. So one thing I feel like I've learned now suddenly that's changed everything from when we talked about the panel before, just sort of the regular, it's so hard to get published and everything. And now I've just become even more Buddhist, realizing, you know what, you have no control over anything, and that things just kind of happen in a cycle. And if you're going to be a writer, you just have to keep doing it. One of the more kind of chimerical things that's happened recently is, as you're mentioning, my young adult novel has been out of print forever. And then somebody wrote an article about it for BuzzFeed, and then Soho Press picked it up, and it looked like this is all very exciting. And now this book that I worked so hard on, that was so hard to get published before, is now coming out again. And I was supposed to get galleys right before the virus. And now not only the presses aren't making galleys, the publication seems like it's going forward, but I recently had a conversation with my publisher that they're actually cutting books. And so everything is kind of, for me, going on this weird cycle where, the book, is getting a new life, and now it might not have a new life. And, my other novel the novel that's coming out with Simon & Schuster seemed, oh my God, I can't get it out. It's taking so long. But now this is the best timing for me that it's not coming out right now. So I'm kind of in this weird cycle of actually kind of a weird Buddhist Zen. And I've weirdly written 3 coronavirus pieces, including an essay that's coming out in an anthology later, where for everything else, I can't think, and I'm in a complete state of chaos. But then I'm just, in some ways, this is just such a metaphor for we really don't have control over anything. So if you want to be a writer, you have to get the meaning from what you're doing and not even think about, in terms of what you think success is going to look like. Because now I just almost feel, with so many of my friends in publishing losing their jobs, now I just feel like, who knows what's going to happen? But this is just what I do still. And I've been really lucky because actually before all this happened, one of my neighbors who's a novelist can just see how chaotic my life is. I'm still working full time, teaching, and, we have her son, and she not only left me her apartment, so I go there every morning and I can write. She left me a giant bottle of whiskey. So I feel very seen in terms of, and just keeping going, and it's not good or bad. It's just what it is. And that's just hit home so much more for me, so I still do it. And I do it because I love it. And I also do it because that's just what I do. And so there's a certain serenity in that has actually superseded my usual pessimism and discouragement, I have to admit.
Wonderful. Thank you. So Sergio is up next. And Sergio Troncoso is the author of 6 books, including most recently A Peculiar Kind of Immigrant Son, a linked short story collection that Louis Uria praised as a world-class collection. Troncoso is a resident faculty member of Yale Writers Workshop and president of the Texas Institute of Letters.
Thank you, Christina, for having me here. So I'm largely a self-taught literary writer. And so I want to focus on that type of discouragement, which might be a little different. I didn't go to a fancy MFA program like Columbia, and I really became a writer through philosophy. I know that would make you laugh, Christina.
Harvard?
Because, right, I did go to Harvard, but I had to carry that burden with me. Because I became a writer really to communicate like these philosophical, psychological ideas through stories. And so my anecdote is on my second book, which was called The Nature of Truth, which is a philosophical novel I first wrote and published in 2003. And it did okay in terms of sales, but I felt over time that it was disappointing in terms of craft. And of course, all of us, care about sales, even as literary writers. But far more important to me was that I become a good literary writer, and that I knew, that I could easily manipulate things like point of view and voice, and that I could create characters that were true on the page. And I got good reviews and some so-so reviews, but I personally was deeply disappointed, very discouraged after my second book came out, and I really wanted to give up. And I kept thinking people didn't appreciate the philosophy in my novel, and I was criticized for my mistakes in the writing craft. And worst of all, I didn't know how to get there. And there meant for me to become a good writer without going to an MFA program. So I really easily could have given up at that point. So how did I get out of that hole, that deep funk after my second book came out years ago? So first, I kept working on other projects. So I think one of the things Charles said rings true to me, which is you keep working. And I tried to learn from the mistakes I made in that first version of the novel, The Nature of Truth. And the philosophy is still important to me because it's really my worldview. But the craft of writing a good literary novel was not where I wanted it to be. So the first piece of advice to other writers I would give is be honest with yourself. Writing is like walking barefoot on broken glass most days. But you have to know what you did wrong first before you can fix it. So I started reading craft book after craft book and novels and on literary writing. And I took apart the novel I had already written and published and started to see the mistakes I made. And I also started reading more widely than ever before. I stopped being arrogant about the philosophy. Who cares if they don't understand what I'm trying to do in terms of philosophy? And I started becoming a perpetual student of literary writing in a practical way, sentence by sentence, paragraph by paragraph, chapter by chapter, and really diving deep into characterization. So the second thing I did as I opened myself to this self-criticism about my own craft was I also never gave up on my novel and The Nature of Truth. So I wrote a book of essays, I edited an anthology, and I wrote even another novel. And I was learning different aspects of the writing craft that I did not know when I wrote The Nature of Truth. So first of all, I'm really stubborn. So stubbornness helps. Persistence really does matter. So that's my second piece of advice. So one summer when I had no contractual writing project and a little teaching, but not too much, just for the hell of it, I said, I'm going to rewrite this damn novel that's already published. And so nobody told me to do it. So I did it again, sentence by sentence and paragraph by paragraph. And it was almost 10 years after it had been published. A really fundamental rewrite, which, changed many aspects of the story and characters, and even kept some important points in the plot, but it was truly a different work. I just didn't want to leave this novel alone because I believed it had important ideas. And if many people weren't reading it, and because the story doesn't work, then that's my fault as a writer. So I got my rights back from the original publisher. And in 2014, 11 years later, a second publisher agreed to publish this drastically revised and updated and changed version of The Nature of Truth. So it's a much better work, the second version. And I'm willing to live where it stands now as a literary work as well as a philosophical work. It's not perfect, and no work I think will ever be perfect. And as a writer, you want to leave your best work behind, of course, or at least the best work given the skills you have at a given moment in time. And I felt like I did that. So the third piece of advice I would give to writers about overcoming discouragement is to compartmentalize. What I mean is, don't say I need to rewrite this entire novel or what my entire book is going to be about. Focus on what you need to learn to make this chapter better, this particular scene better. Every essay, every short story I've written since then, I work on a different aspect of craft that I need to improve on. Little by little, I found this very narrow focus with my writing helps me to get to work rather than being overwhelmed by an entire project. And getting to work for me is always the point. It's a lot easier to tackle something specific, something concrete, and that in itself starts moving you forward to complete the greater project, a novel, a whole novel, for example. So that's my take. That's kind of, that's basically my deepest discouragement when I almost quit writing and how I got out of it.
Well, thank goodness you didn't. Okay, our next person up is Milda DeVoe. She's won top prizes in flash fiction, literary fiction, poetry, horror, and she co-wrote a sci-fi musical produced by Tisch School of the Arts. I never knew that. She's the author of the literary nonprofit Pen Parentis, and she co-hosts with me every month. And her most recently published short stories included in the 2019 anthology, The Twisted Book of Shadows, which is running for a 2020 Bram Stoker Award. Pretty cool. Milda?
Hi. Thank you again, Christina, for... Why are we on echo? Do you hear the echo, or is it just me that's hearing an echo?
Someone has something on, maybe Facebook or something else.
Oh, probably my daughter. Great. Yay. So not only am I nervous, but I have technical problems. That's pretty good. So I'll just talk and ignore them, as you do. So hi, everybody, and thank you so much for tuning in, anybody who's actually watching. That's super nice of you to take this time when you could be watching Netflix and watch us instead. We appreciate it. And I am super thrilled to be back on this panel. It was really fun to do it in Portland when we did it before, and it's just cool to sort of be back on the same panel. And it's amazing to me how transformed the topic is, just by the fact that the discouragement level when we were talking about it before was about like, oh, my short story was rejected by 4 markets and I don't know if I should still be a writer, and now it's like, I have to find food for my family. I don't know, like it's just such a different level. And so the discouragement that I've been seeing, particularly, so I run, as Christina said, I founded this organization called Pen Parentis, which probably some of the audience, at least a lot of them probably are familiar with, but it's a nonprofit that provides resources to writers to help them stay creative after they have a family. Because pretty much after having kids, you have a sort of existential crisis of like, what is important in my life and why am I doing this? And to what end am I taking time away from my family? And I think everybody who has any kind of a career has that feeling of like, oh my God, my children or my career. And so we're trying to redefine basically that parenthood isn't a career. It's just a life choice. And you get to have a kid or not. And that has, then you have to figure out how you're going to have a career or not, but that they're not balancing things that you balance. They're actually just overlapping things that happen. Like if somebody got sick, for example, you still have to decide if you're going to write your short story or make chicken soup. So anyway, and that word sick suddenly has a lot of meanings too. I've said something similar to that before, and all of a sudden in this coronavirus land, it's like all of our terms have gotten redefined. But anyway, what I've been seeing a lot of in the meetups is a basic level of existential crisis. Like, is writing important in general? Like, are writers important? Are artists important? And what I have personally felt is that more than ever, telling a story is important. I know that half of the work calls that I do get derailed because we're really far more interested in the story of the human being that we're sitting across from at this moment, or sitting desktop to desktop from. We're more interested in like, okay, how are you? How's your mother? Are you okay? Is your family together or apart? What's going on? How did you get food today? You know, what are you doing to find some time to do your job? How are you doing that? Those stories are, I think, really important. And what's equally important, I think, are how do you get your head out of this constant state of fear and anxiety and pressure? And, you know, you have to be the mom, you have to be the nice person, you have to be, all these pressures are constantly on us 24/7 now. How do you get out of that? Like for me, I love my writing more than ever. And I find that time where I get to be in a fictional world where I get control and I get to choose what people wear, and the fact that they touch each other or not is not going to kill them, makes me very happy. And actually, it's a beautiful escape for my mind to just go and write. So I think that it's an important action. But then also the stories that are written, I don't know about you guys, but I spend a lot of time watching old movies and reading novels and listening to music that has a story that's fun to sing along with. All of these things were created by somebody, and they weren't created specifically to get me out of my head during coronavirus, but they are certainly working to get me out of my head during this time. So whatever you create can always be used to save someone, whether or not it is a really fantastical work of fiction that's set in some science fiction universe, or whether it's like, you know, your actual domestic story with a few names changed and let's not talk about my mother-in-law. Like, it doesn't matter. It's an important thing. Somebody is going to gravitate to it. Somebody is going to need it. At some time, somebody's going to need to read that book or that story. So I'm hearing so much of that, that it makes me feel better about the fact that I am taking time to try to get some writing done or send out some stories and get some good responses. I get jazzed when I get a good response, as equally as I get depressed or for a moment, momentarily bored about the fact that something got rejected. And I think as writers, you can't get accepted unless you send out. There is no way to get a published story unless you put it into the universe. It doesn't happen. And so if you never send out, you have made it impossible to get an acceptance. Even if you're self-publishing, you have to put it out there. Like, you have to actually move it from your desktop to the publishing platform. So putting your work out, as Charles said, like when you get a rejection, sending it out to 2 other markets, that's fantastic. I think that, you know, just getting it off of your plate all the time is a really good way. You keep the balls in the air. I juggle. I ran away with a group of jugglers when I was in college, and I learned to juggle. And one of the things you do is you don't, first of all, you don't look at the balls, you just throw them. Like, it becomes natural to just keep throwing them. And secondly, like, there's always one that's in the air. Like, you've got 2, you're catching them one after another, you're catching the next one, and you're throwing it back up. And if you stop, then the 3rd ball falls on the ground. I can't juggle more than 2, but other people can. But like, you kind of have to keep that momentum. And so to me, I think of that with my stories. There's a free what's it called? A program, a website that is a very beautiful, great thing for people who are trying to get paid stories out there. And I've certainly told all of the people that come to the Pen Parentis meetups about this, but it's called Submission Grinder. And it's specifically for mostly genre stories. It's specifically for paid markets for short stories. And you just send your thing out. It's like what is that thing called? There used to be a paid one. It probably still exists. Duotrope. So it's just like a Duotrope, except it's free. And you can search by how much money you want to make. You can search by how quickly you want them to respond. You can, I want something that's going to respond within 3 days. They have that. It exists in the world. And it's a free thing, and it keeps track of how many stories you've sent out. And I use that all the time. Like, my favorite thing about this website is that once you've gotten a rejection and you log it as a personal or a what is it, a form rejection or a personal rejection, you log it, and then it gives you a little pop-up. It says, would you like to submit this story somewhere else, or would you like to submit a new story to this market? So it's just this, it's a very gracious way, like, to use technology to sort of keep pushing your stuff out. And the writing of it is the love of the writing. And I'll just share this ridiculous quote that has been helping me get through this time. And that is, to overcome fear, the only thing that overcomes fear is love. So if you want to overcome fear, the only thing that's more powerful than that is love. And I personally love writing. I love getting accepted. And so that overcomes my fear of, like, oh, they're not going to like it. They're not going to want it. It's not good enough, blah, 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 blah. They can tell me it's not good enough. That's fine. It will be good enough somewhere. So.
Okay, thank you. So here's a question that I have. Okay, sorry about the light. Like, literally, it died, of course, during the live cast.
It's okay. It's like David Fincher is shooting you, and that's all.
Okay, so my question is this. I happen to be a really slow writer, right? And so I wrote this awesome essay, and it's about mask making, and everyone already has their essays out about mask making. So no one wants another mask making essay. What do you say? Like, what's your advice to people like me who literally write so slowly that by the time they actually have something, it's too late?
Right?
Wait,
hold on.
Charles, my advice is write faster.
Write faster?
Yeah.
Okay.
Mine is write about universal truths that never change.
See, the thing is, as having been a magazine journalist, you're up against something that you're really not up against with fiction. And that is just what you're talking about, is you have to have a hook. And the hook that you have is probably a hook that everyone knows about, like making masks. So if that's the kind of stuff you're going to write, practically, you've got to get it out fast, or you've got to find some obscure place that hasn't done their mask essay yet. And there are those places. It's not going to be the usual suspects like the Times or something like that, but there will be some place that
well, if it's not the Times, I mean.
Well, the point is that that's where everyone sends it first, is the op-ed or modern romance or whatever it is. So the modern love. But you really do, if you're going to write essays, you really have to, and they're timely. They're hooked to something timely. You really do have to get them done quickly, unfortunately.
Okay, Sergio.
But you can also pitch.
Yeah, I mean,
I would say just pitching it. If we're talking about like a nonfiction essay, is you can. You could just pitch editors and say you have, like, if you already kind of have the idea, you can kind of tell them and sort of try to get a reservation, so to speak. You can pitch as many people as you want at once. Because I like doing that, and then I'll get stuck having to write it. And that itself becomes its own prompt. So I enjoy doing that.
That's a great idea. Yeah. Really great idea. Sergio?
You know, when the El Paso massacre happened, I don't know if you remember, in August of last year, I started writing something, and I had something done. This is following what I will now call the Salzberg dictum, which is I finished in 4 days this essay, and I knew somebody was going to take it. And so after I finished a few drafts, CNN Opinion wanted it. And so they contacted me. Do you have something on this El Paso thing? And I said, sure enough. So I didn't wait to pitch it to anybody. There was a big event. I knew I wanted to write about it, and I started writing about it without thinking where it's going to go. But just I thought about speed. How fast can I get this done in a good way? And then later I tried to find a place for it, and it ended up in a good place. It took them about a year to pay me, by the way. CNN, they're not exactly organized. but I think that's something. The other tact I take when writing an essay is I often look at something really obscure, actually the opposite, which is something no one is looking at, no one is talking about, a topic that I have not read anywhere. And so it gives me a little more time to make that essay a bit more literary and just kind of play with it before I start submitting it to some sort of literary journal. So that doesn't have that time factor in it.
Just about having to do what Marie said is you can do that, Marie. You can call up an editor or whatever, but they're going to say, yeah, sounds good, write it. They're not going to, unless you're David Sedaris or Sarah Vowell, who have a platform and they know whatever they get from them is going to be commercial enough. But if you, because I had a friend who I don't write a lot of essays, but I have a friend who wrote a lot, and he would do that. And he'd been published in a lot of places like the Times, and he'd call up and he'd say to the editor, look, I've got this great idea of doing a piece about my parents who ballroom dance, and they've been ballroom dancing for 50 years. And the editor said, that sounds good, write it. Doesn't mean they're going to take it. So I would say that what you're doing, Sergio, is really the right approach, is write it quickly, and then you can fiddle with it a little bit, and then you have something to send out, because that reservation thing might work if you're a regular contributor to someplace, is they might wait for your piece because they've seen your work before. But generally speaking, unfortunately, in terms of essays that are timely, I think Sergio is right. And the way you approached it, Sergio, was absolutely right. You took 4 days to write it and then got it out there, because if you have the idea, the chances are 10, 20, 30, 40 other people have the same idea. They're not going to have your take on it necessarily, and they might not have your speed, but you've got to be pretty early in there, because there are a lot of writers. And I always get a kick out of my students who will say, I have this unique idea. And first of all, I smile, because there's no such thing as a unique idea. I mean, someone in the world is going to write about it. And the second thing is, it's not so much the idea, it's the writing and the approach that you take. You had a particular approach, I'm sure, Sergio, in the piece that you did, that even if I wrote on that subject, there's no way, without even seeing what you wrote, that I could write the same thing, because your experiences are different from mine. And you grew up down there, down there. So it's all about the piece itself, I think.
Yeah, and by the way, people want to read the piece. It's on my website under essays.
That's great. Thank you. So, okay, what if, let's say you have this book that it's taken you years to write, and it's time to send it out, or find an agent. So many people are looking for agents. They have no idea how. Supposedly, right? The advice is to find out your favorite authors, right, and find those agents, right, that they have. But how do people actually do it? What is your advice to them? They're not known or anything. They're not like you. What would you say? Charles?
I can take it first. I would do research. I would go on the web, and I'd find agencies. I'd find agents. It's really easy to find if you Google, and find someone who's publishing the kind of book, who has clients who kind of write like you or subjects like you. The biggest mistake is to send it to some agent who, if you're writing horror, doesn't handle horror. It's a waste of your time and theirs. So I think researching, and I've spoken to a lot of agents because I run agents panels, and they're really taken with someone who's done their research.
Actually, can you talk about that for one moment? The pitch conference.
Oh, well, we have a New York Writers Workshop has a pitch conference where you can pitch your fiction or nonfiction book to editors, but we also have an agents panel, and I'm the one who books the agents panel. So I know all these agents. Doesn't mean that I can get them as my agent, by the way. But anyway, so I've been to a lot of these panels because I go to every one of them and I book them. And I have every editor agent who's been asked this question is really impressed if they get a query from someone and it's obvious that the person who's queried them have researched them. And they'll say, I know that you represent so-and-so. I love that writing, and I love that book. And mine is a little bit like that, so I thought you might be interested. So that's one of the pieces of advice I would give is to research the agents. Just don't get a bunch of names and send it out. And the other thing is don't multiply submit in the same email where they can see like you've submitted to like 40 agents. Some people will forget. You shouldn't even blind copy. Do it individually.
Okay. Anyone else have any advice?
I mean, I could say I've had 2 agents, and one of them I got because she found me because I was just posting stuff, and she said, "Are you writing a book?" And I said, "Yeah, actually." And the other one, 10 years, 15, lots and lots of years later, the other one I got from a Columbia agents mixer. Like it was an agents mixer where you just go and you meet people. And we talked about politics. We talked about food that we liked, and we hung out because we were both there early and everybody else was 20 years old and got there super late. And so, we just talked and became pretty friendly. And it was probably 20 minutes into the mixer when she actually said, like, "Do you have a book?" And I was like, "Yeah, kind of." And so that's how I got her. Now she's a painter.
Well, that's great. That's helpful.
The last email I got from my agent was, "Why don't you come to my, art exhibit?" And I was like, "I thought you were my agent."
The worst is if they become a poet, because the only thing less paying than an agent probably is a poet.
So, okay. Let's say, I've heard actually that a lot of artists and writers are taking this COVID opportunity to pretend they're at a writing residency and they're getting all this work done. My experience has been actually kind of different. I feel like I'm cooking and cleaning and doing the dishes constantly. And I don't quite feel like all the time that I've been like in my body, right? Like it just seems like there's this panic all over. What kind of advice do you give to authors who right now are not able to focus as well? Like what are some practical tips?
I can tell you from the meetups that we do that I'm coming across a lot of people who are really kind of in crisis, that have something that happens that just either blocks them emotionally or is so draining that they just they just feel like they're done. And yet they have these beautiful, like when they talk about their writing, they still have that spark and that joy for that piece. It's just they can't get the space emotionally. And I always go back to set goals that are achievable. Whatever the achievable goal is. If it is, I will open up my file on my desktop today and I will just open it and then I'll walk away from it. That's fine. Just do that. Like do an achievable goal and get somebody to be accountable to, whether that's a spouse or a partner or your kid or your teacher or any person, a best friend, and just say, listen, I'm struggling. I need some accountability. I'm going to tell you I'm going to do something. Can you just ask me tomorrow if I did it? And it will bind you, first of all, to that person in a beautiful way. And so if it's another writer, you guys can really be close. And it just, you just build off of that. Like today I can write a sentence. I'm going to look at a sentence. I'm going to do a sentence. That's it. I can't do anything else, but I will do that today. And then if you know that you're going to talk to that person and have to be accountable to them, you'll do it like at 3 a.m. the night before, and it'll feel stupid, but you'll do it. And then you'll be like, I actually did something. So that's mine.
My practical advice for you, Christina, is to rent an apartment someplace, send your 2 kids, the dog, and your husband to that apartment.
Well, that was supposed to go to a residency on the 14th, right before Columbia was going on spring break. And then basically the 13th, they told us that we couldn't go. But one thing that was interesting is I had packed so many books, because one of the things I love to do is read while I'm at a residency. And so I ended up stumbling into, I don't know if you've seen on Twitter that Ye and Lee is running a sort of book club called Tolstoy Together.
Mm.
We're all reading War and Peace together, for which I thought I have zero time for this. And it's a kind of crazy idea. And then also I had to order the book from Belmont Books, and they're very sweet about it. So I was 4 days behind. So I was already 100 pages behind. But actually, once I've gotten into the rhythm of this, and I have gotten in this mentality of, oh, I'm doing some concentrated reading. And I've always loved Russian literature, and I've never read War and Peace. And then just sort of the weird craft talks and so forth have made me realize again why you love to write, because when you read something that's beautiful, you want to do it too. And so this is one thing that would never have happened without us being stuck like this.
Yeah, that's true.
Christine, can I give you some advice, Christina?
Sure.
Become a refrigerator repairman. That's what happened to me. I rolled with it. I'm stuck here in rural Connecticut, and that's where we are. And a refrigerator went down, and so I had to learn how to fix a refrigerator by myself. Take out the back panel, and learn the intricacies of the electronics. And all of this, I thought, I'm going to write a story about a refrigerator repairman, and so the different things I've had to do that have really nothing to do with my writing, like chopping wood and other stuff, I'm already incorporating into stories and into other things that I'm working on now. The other thing I found that I just I'm editing an anthology, and where I'm the main editor, that I can do a lot of editing, but not necessarily new writing. So I'm doing a lot of that. I'm doing a lot of editing of old stuff and of other people's work as this, just to finish this project that was almost done. And so I'm just kind of rolling with whatever happens in this sort of weird COVID state that we're all in. And by the way, I do have a novel that I finished that was just taken by a publisher that has to do with the pandemic.
Wow.
And this was written 2 years ago. And the publisher says we need to get this out now. So it's probably going to come out in a year from now. So, but this is stuff I did, a while ago, not stuff I'm doing now. But it's a challenge, I think. You're absolutely right to get away and just focus your mind in this craziness. Every time I hear another presidential news conference, I feel like I'm sick to my stomach. And so it takes me a whole hours to recover, simply to get my head in my writing or in whatever I'm reading. And I've also, the other last thing I would say, this is sort of going on what Marie said. I'm deep into Lord of the Rings. I haven't read it in decades, but I needed to travel in my mind somewhere. And I needed some great story that I knew from way back when. And I'm into it, and I'm loving it.
I think part of the problem is, because I get asked that question a lot, is putting too much pressure on yourself. Years ago, I did an essay for the New York Times Book Review, and it was an idea that I had, because I was going through it, is how do writers feel when they finish a book? And I got to interview all these famous writers. Anyone that I wanted to interview, I just got their number and called them up and interviewed them. And several of the answers really stuck with me. One of them was a writer by the name of Stanley Elkin, who I asked him how he felt when he finished a book. And he said, when I first finish a book, I feel like I've invented the English language. And about a day or two later, I think it's the biggest piece of crap I've ever seen. That was one. And another person I called up was Joyce Carol Oates, because I figured she finishes a book like every other day. So she must have some routine. So first of all, it was before I had a computer. The computers were just, the word processors were just coming in. And she had just gotten one, she told me. And she was trying to talk me into getting one. And I thought, this woman is going to be really dangerous, because if she finished a book every other day without a computer, what's she going to do with a computer? So I said to her, what do you do when you finish the book? And she said, oh, I go into another room and write poetry. So she said, but I have a friend, and you can't use his name, but I have a friend who goes out, and after he finishes a book, he goes into the forest and hunts small creatures. And I said, oh, really? She said, yes, it's Richard Ford. So I thought, I'm going to call up Richard Ford and I'm going to ask him, but I'm not going to say that Joyce Carol Oates told me. So I said to him, I think he had recently finished The Sports Writer. And I said to him, what do you do? How do you feel when you finish a book? What do you do? And he said, well, I go out into the, I'm a hunter. So I go out into the wilds and I hunt animals. So she was absolutely right. The point I learned is that there is no formula. There is no silver bullet of how to do it. And so I thought you made a really good point, Sergio. Fixing a refrigerator might do it. Just doing that, the act of doing that may set off a creative spark in you that sends you to the computer to write.
Well, and the thing is, it made me feel great that it saved me $500 to do this. So first it was just like, I'm thrilled I can actually do this. I'm not just some sort of heady, stupid intellectual. I can get my hands dirty, and my wife was like, oh my God, you fixed it. After an entire day of delving into the refrigerator mechanics.
It's probably you paid more than you would have made from CNN for that essay, probably.
Just about, So anyway, I think it is good to go with whatever is moving you at the moment, whether that's literary or writing or not. I think it'll make you feel better.
And sometimes not writing for a while is good. At least it is for me.
Okay. So some of you have talked about success and the idea of success and how deadly it can be. Marie touched on this, so maybe Marie can start this discussion. What, with Facebook and social media, like you're constantly seeing everyone's feeds and all their successes, and what do you say to people who, like, they don't want to get discouraged and they want to support their friends and they want to, but what's your advice for people who are not getting what they want done or out there?
Well, first, just speaking as a Buddhist is, there is going to be envy no matter what, because because this is sort of it's very difficult to be a writer. So one of the things is just acknowledging, I think, the feelings first and kind of letting yourself feel that. And there's a writer named Bonnie Friedman who wrote a really great book called Writing Past Dark. And I think in my memory, the whole thing was about writer envy. And it was just really, so I guess I'll recommend that book because there's such a good Buddhist quote about something, but when you're looking at other people, like you're basically not getting your own stuff done. So that's one way that I kind of try to feel, and then there's also sometimes I think Facebook and other social media is really good because there's a certain way you can support people, and that also feels very good. And then you can also feel a certain anxiety. So I also just try to check in with myself. Am I just scrolling and feeling more anxious about it? If I can consciously see that this is sort of detrimental to my particular emotional or spiritual state, I'm trying to be more disciplined about just not doing it. But then at the same time, at other times, because we don't have colleagues, so to speak, you do want to reach out often through social media. So at the same time, it can be a very nurturing place. So I think it's all about balance. But I get totally envious and obsessed with people all the time. I admit it.
But that might be a spark to you to write. If this person can do it, I can do it.
True.
The other thing is that what I try to remember is that it's not a zero-sum game. If all four of you get a book published, it doesn't mean that I'm not going to get a book published. It has nothing to do with that. And if anything, it might tell me that, look, if they can do it, I can do it. But the other thing is that I'm much more practical. If Christina's book, Beauty, comes out and goes on the bestseller list, the next person,
it's going to, right?
the person I'm going to for a blurb for my book is Christina. So I'm hoping for her or Milda or Sergio or you, Marie. I'm hoping you have bestsellers all over, because now I can go to you and say, hey, would you mind blurbing my book? And it's going to make me feel good. So I think there are ways. I'm not saying that we're all not envious. We absolutely are. But there are ways to channel it that I think can be productive rather than sort of paralyzing us because you had a hit, Christina, or you did, Milda, or Marie, or Sergio. Your hit is not my loss. If anything, it's my gain. And I've learned that in teaching too, that I want my students to be successful. First of all, it makes me look good. But it doesn't mean that I'm not going to be successful because they are.
I'm always excited when people I know get good things.
Me too.
I'm less excited when people I don't know get good things. But when people that I do, like any of it, it's really fun to be like, oh my God, I know that person. They're in the New York Times. That's so cool. Like, it's an edifying and joyful thing. It's a celebration. It's somebody had a birthday. Like, I'm excited, and
bad writers, Milda.
Yeah.
Bad writers and they have success. Then that really bothers me.
I try not to know any bad writers. I just.
Okay, so we have a question from someone, and it's any predictions or insights about the future of publishing in the age of COVID-19?
You're going to have to wear gloves to read.
I'm going to guess that there's going to be a wave of pandemic books that are going to come out right after this. Yeah, Sergio's will be one of them. And then, well, what I was thinking is depending on whether the actual COVID is a thing that has a peak and then it disappears, or whether it actually transforms our society, I think we might look at some real escapist fantasy, crazy, like I need to get like happy endings. Like, when you think of the movies that came out during Second World War, like all those movies that are so trite and light and joyful and cheerful, and it's just literally meant to make you forget what's actually happening in the real world. So depending on how long COVID goes, I'm going to guess there's going to be a pool of that. And it's a guess, but I like to guess things.
Well, there'll definitely be a baby boom for sure.
And a divorce boom.
And a divorce boom.
I think there's a real hunger for community,
Yeah.
for getting together with people, even through these mediums, for example. But even through writing, through making you feel you belong somewhere, because I think this has sort of torn us apart in many ways, physically, but in other ways. I don't hang out with my writer friends as much simply because you're separated. So I think whatever that means, whether it will be more through virtual communities or other ways, but that kind of writing, perhaps more weighty. Writing on community, I think will become more important, maybe.
Cool. So Marie is reading War and Peace. What are you doing, Sergio?
I'm reading Lord of the Rings.
Oh, yes, that's right. And you, Charles?
I just finished reading three really good books. One was called Furious Hours, about a trial that Harper Lee covered but didn't write about, talk about writer's block. And then one called The Third Rainbow Girl, which is part memoir and part true crime. And the latest, John le Carré, which is Agent Running in the Field.
That's a lot of books.
Yeah.
How about you, Milda?
A lot of time.
That's great. I just finished reading Vanity Fair to my daughter, and we just finished watching it on Amazon, which I highly recommend to anybody who has read the book. It's a great miniseries, and we had such fun discussing why things changed and why that, how they did the Thackeray in the beginning. It's fantastic. But for myself, before bed, I'm actually reading The Resistors, the Gish Jen book.
Oh, that's so good.
Yay!
So I'm really excited. So
Gish,
just
gish, gish. So we have another question, and it's any ideas on how to motivate to rewrite versus start another book? Like, when do you know which you should be doing and when to give up and set something aside?
When it no longer gives you joy. Move on to the next thing. I mean, if you're hitting your head against the wall with a rewrite and people are telling you from the outside, this doesn't, like, I'm not feeling it. If you're hearing it enough, like, I think for me, I always write it to the best that I can do it. And then I give it to a reader. And if that reader responds the way, and I give it to a reader that I expect to like it. Like my first reader is always somebody who I think is going to respond to it well. My reading group is like my my soul, my people, right? And if I give it them something that I think they're gonna like, and they're like, yeah, then I might rewrite it, or I might just be like, maybe I need to put it away for a while.
Okay.
But I always have new ideas, so there's always something pushing at wanting to be written. So.
Great. So let's sum this up because it's already 9. Marie, anything?
I actually wanted to go back to something that Sergio was saying actually about philosophy and about what kind of meaning we might take from this. Because for one of the pieces that I was doing, it's also about rereading. To write about it, I was rereading the book The Plague, which the Camus book, and it was kind of interesting because I haven't read it since college. But one of the things I never noticed, and I feel like people just didn't notice in general in the book, there's one hero. There's the doctor, of course, who kind of sounds the alarm, but there's also a character called Theroux, the journalist, and the journalist actually becomes the moral center of the book, and he talks about how not only witnessing, but the idea of lucid speaking is a moral act in itself. And so that made me realize too that, okay, we're not donning masks and being out there on the front lines, but the idea of creating truth and creating literature is in itself a moral act, and it is something that we do, even though it doesn't seem, as material as something that doctors do. And so I've kind of taken a lot of motivation from that what we do has value and has societal value as well. So that's my thought.
I think it was you, Marie, who once told me when I was like, oh, I can't stand writing. And you were like, what are you going to do? Not write? And that basically said it right there. Like, what am I going to do? Not write. Like, that would not happen. So
exactly.
Just give that part up and just do it. Sergio?
Well, for me, it's all about building community. And so just like a couple of weeks ago, I became president of the Texas Institute of Letters. And we typically had our annual banquet in April. It's a big annual banquet. We have it all across the state, Austin, Dallas, Houston, et cetera, El Paso. And we had to cancel it. So one of the things I did was I reached out to the 19 new members who were inducted this year. You had to be inducted into this organization. You can't apply. And we have like great members like Larry McMurtry, Rick Riordan, Cormac McCarthy, ad infinitum, Lawrence Wright from the New Yorker. And so I'm setting up readings, online readings for all these new members, 5 at a pop. And they're thrilled because they lost their chance to be in front of the entire organization. And so the entire organization will be in a big Zoom video listening to these writers. And everyone, we're trying to reach out to keep these connections because, we want to be together. We want to hear each other's work. I want to listen to somebody's poetry. I want to listen to their short stories or their novels or their history book.
Sorry.
So anyway, so that's what I'm doing. I'm trying to find ways to make community.
Okay, thank you. We have one more question and we're going to wrap this up. How do you know when you have finished writing your book?
Finished? You're like...
that's the question.
10 years later, you're writing. Yeah.
So sick of it that you can't look at it another minute. That's when you know you're finished. And some writer once said they never finish a book, they abandon it. And I think that's true.
I think one thing that I learned when I was in grad school, I had studied with Michael Cunningham, and he had a story called White Angel in the New Yorker. And what he did in class was, and Milda might have been there too, he actually went through it with a Sharpie marker and edited again. And he showed it to us because he said it never really ends. It just, you can always be changing it and editing it. You can always be making it better. So at some point, you just have to let it go. And you will want to change it later, possibly. But just for that period, just understand that it's okay.
Yeah, there's a reason why many writers they hide their first books from public view. Like, they like their third book or their one that won the Pulitzer Prize, but not the first one or the second one. It's okay.
Okay. Anyone else want to speak to that question? No.
I mean,
okay. Well, okay,
just quickly,
Sergio?
for me, it's just instinctual. After a lot of rewrites, I find that this is it. I have to let it go. It's almost like hearing the song a certain way, and you hear it, and that's the tune you want.
Marie?
I kind of feel like it's almost like baking. You kind of just have to know when it's done. I just get a feeling like it's done. I don't know.
If I don't think I can make it any better, worth the time that I'm putting into it, it's time to move on. I mean, but I just said this real quick. What you did, Sergio, I had an idea years ago, which is kind of like what you did. I would like to rewrite and publish the same book every 3 years, because it wouldn't be if I could fix it, it wouldn't be the same. And it's one of the reasons when I do readings, I hate reading from something that's published already. And I know I'm supposed to do that because you're pitching a book. I much prefer reading something that I'm working on, because when I read something that is already published, I can see all the mistakes and all the things I would do differently. But if I'm reading something I'm working on, I know that I can fix it. I can read it. If something doesn't sound right, I can fix it. So I think that it's all you guys are saying the same thing. It's almost instinctual. You just know, as you say, Marie, when it's baked and it's not going to get any better. It's as good as it can be.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for being on this panel. Thank you, everyone, for coming to see us.
Thanks, everyone.
Hopefully this was helpful.
Thanks.
And we love you. Keep writing.
We'll do this next year and we'll get it better. We'll do it better next year.
Thank you.
Sorry about my tech difficulties.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Right.